Hello, hello, and welcome to The Conversation. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico's White House bureau chief, and every week on this show, I invite one of the most compelling power players in Washington and beyond in for a chat to find out how they're navigating and shaping this incredible era in American politics. And boy, guys, it has been a week. I spent part of it in The Hague at the NATO Summit, where I got the chance to sit down with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. We talked about a bunch of the breaking news coming out of Iran and the NATO Summit, but I want to bring a part of the conversation to you where we talked about his historic roles as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. And I had him bring us into the room a little bit to explain how the president navigates and uses this really ideologically diverse cabinet that he has. I also talked this week to Alex Bruesewitz. Now, you may not know his name, but in Trump world, he is a fixture. He's been his social media guru and his Swiss Army knife consultant for quite some time. So I talked to Alex, but first, take a listen to some of my conversation with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. You have been given quite a lot of roles in this administration. Yeah. Look, no offense to these guys, but I have seen the before and after pictures of Secretary of State Blinken and former NSA Jake Sullivan. They don't look so hot at the end of all of this. And they were each doing one of those jobs. I mean, there are a lot of people that are saying, how on earth are you wearing these two hats? And what are the trade-offs that you have to think about?
There really isn't. I mean, in many cases, you end up being in the same meetings or in the same places. There's just one less person in there, if you think about it. The two jobs really do overlap in many cases. Obviously, there's the function of running the agency of the Department of State. But what I find myself in many cases doing is when a lot of people would come to Washington, for example, for meetings, and they'd want to meet with a national security advisor and then meet with me as Secretary of State. Now they can do both in one meeting. The same with when we're around the table, for example, in the Situation Room. There was a chair for the National Security Council, one for the State Department. Now they're both there.
Are you doing more time at the White House than traveling abroad?
Well, when there's a conflict, yeah. I mean, and so what we've had over the last couple of weeks is we've known that there might be something breaking out in the Middle East, and then we had to manage our role in it. So, yeah, you spend more time there in that regard. But I go to the State Department almost every day because we have a lot of bilateral meetings with foreign ministers that are coming to town, so I go and see them over there.
Well, and the NSC has changed a lot under you, and I think a lot of people know what the Secretary of State role is, but how do you envision, what does the Marco Rubio NSC look like?
Well, it's not the Marco Rubio NSC, it's the Donald Trump NSC, and what its job is to coordinate the agencies to execute the president's mission. So it's the conductor of an orchestra. The NSC doesn't play the clarinet or the flute or the violin. Its job as the conductor is to make sure that everybody is playing the sheet music based on their instrument. And so you coordinate the different elements of our government depending on the issue, the national security issue. So if it's in this case, what's happening over the last couple of weeks, it's making sure the Department of Defense, the Department of Treasury, the Justice Department, all the different elements of government are represented around the table, and each of them have a piece or something they're supposed to be executing on and are doing their part. But ultimately, the ideas and the execution comes from the individual agencies. The job of the National Security Council is just to coordinate that, to ensure that all of the agencies are working together and doing their part of the broader strategic plan. We have a great team at State, too, so it kind of works seamlessly. It's worked very well so far, and I think the outcome proves it here with regards to what we've seen with Israel and Iran.
For more of my conversation with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, head to Politico.com. And next, I am joined by someone who's extremely online and also pretty politically powerful. His name is Alex Bruesewitz. If you know, you know. If you don't know, Alex has been a fixture in Trump world for quite some time. He's just 28 years old, but he's become an invaluable advisor to President Trump for all things media, especially social media. And that's saying something for a president who created his own social media company and really values his public image a lot. You might remember in 2024, during the campaign, the president started showing up in some surprising places, mostly on podcasts, even podcasts that weren't typically at all about politics. Well, that strategy was in part thanks to Alex. I wanted to talk to him now because I really wanted to hear the backstory of that, how he convinced Trump to sit down with a guy like Theo Vaughn and have these extended conversations, what the tactics are for the MAGA movement that's become this online juggernaut, and what the strategy is for them right now. Here's my conversation with Alex. Alex Bruesewitz, thank you for joining the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Dasha.
So I think one of the early days when I first talked about you on air, I called you Trump's chief Twitter troll or something to that effect. For those of our listeners that don't know who you are, you might not be a household name for everyone, but you certainly are in Trump world. You've been kind of the guy behind the online-ness of this very online president and this very online movement. Can you just take me back to how on earth you made your way into Trump world, and especially at a really young age? I think you first started working with him when you were in your early 20s, right?
Yeah, it's been a fun journey. It actually started when I was sitting in study hall in my high school class in Ripon, Wisconsin, when I was 17 going on 18 years old. I tweeted a picture of Trump Chicago, and I said the sign on Trump Chicago would look just as good on the White House. And then next thing I know, the president retweeted that. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. 1 month after I graduated high school, President Trump came down the golden escalator and said he was running for president of the United States. And I was sitting in Oshkosh, Wisconsin by the river, watching his announcement where he said they're not sending their best. And he was right about that. And I was inspired to get active and involved, and I became a very vocal online supporter of the president. I started my political consulting business, X Strategies, in May of 2017 when I was 19, and we have had fun since.
I feel like the MAGA universe has sort of taken over a whole bunch of the internet, especially with Elon Musk coming into the fold. But take me a step back and talk to me about how conservatives started to really dominate online culture.
Well, I mean, I think our ideas have always been better than the left's, and our ideas has...
Well, people can debate that, but I do think that your strategy has been different and has been more effective in a lot of ways than the left with how you talk about your ideas.
I think we are better communicators online by a long shot. We showed that in 2016. The president, obviously, I wasn't part of that campaign, but I think the chief marketing officer of Facebook said that the Trump campaign in 2016 used Facebook better than any brand and any company they've ever seen before. And that was in large part why President Trump won. The Democrats, they needed to start cracking down on what they call misinformation and disinformation. But I think most of that comes from MSDNC and CNN. But they had to do a crackdown, they said. And so they started suppressing conservative content. After the 2020 election, all of the big tech companies moved to censor and deplatform President Trump and many of his top allies. And then when Elon purchased X, he kind of restored free speech. And then a lot of other social media companies who were actually performing worse than X because of Elon, they had to start pivoting back and they started opening it up to free speech again. And so we once again had an election where we had the internet being free and fair. There's many more voices online. There's many more Republican or conservative influencers, if you will. There's a lot more social media savvy politicians on our side than there were a decade ago. And that's in large part due to President Trump's use of social media to get his message out.
We've seen, you flying with the president on Air Force One. You've been an ad hoc advisor to him. How did you, because the circle is tight around the president. How did you penetrate, especially at such a young age, and get him and his family to trust you?
My whole goal in life was to be able to work with the president. I started my company, obviously trying to...
Why? Why was that something that at 17, 18?
Well, yeah, I mean, I
19 years
old. I had no
old.
idea what that... When I was 17 and 18 years old, I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do with my life. I was, kind of rebellious and didn't really have a care in the world. I didn't really want to go to college. I didn't really want to do this. I didn't really want to do that. But for some reason, when the president said he was interested in running for office, I was like, this guy's awesome. For the first time, I was like, kind of influenced by someone and interested in doing something. And so I started my business when I was 19, based on the president, and built a very successful business, a good life for myself, based, supporting his agenda. And so it was a goal of mine to meet him and then ultimately work for him. It happened because after the 2020 election, a lot of people, I guess, in his previous orbit or in Republican politics, they wanted to distance themselves from the president. They caved to media pressure. They disappointed our voters when they did not.
He was out in the wilderness
fight
for a while after January 6th, especially.
And I pressed in. I pressed in right after the 2020 election. I was very vocal. I had concerns about what took place during that election. I still have concerns. Millions and millions of Americans have concerns and questions. And a lot of Republican operatives, they just, acted like it was fine and dandy, and then they distanced themselves. And I pressed in. I was very aggressive. And I ultimately earned the respect and got on the radar of the president's family. I started working with Donald Trump Jr. In 2021. He was a fan of my grit and fight, and then ultimately started engaging and connecting with the president later that year. And I've kind of been around since, and I've tried to be helpful where I can. I don't really have one role. I like to play a Swiss Army knife role, and wherever I can be helpful, I want to be helpful.
Well, one big area where you were really helpful in the 2024 campaign was sort of what some people call the manosphere of podcasting. First of all, I'm curious on your take of that term, and then I want to talk to you about the strategy there.
Yeah, I think the term is kind of dorky. Another thing is that they always add a right-wing manosphere to the front of it, but a lot of the podcast hosts that the president sat down with were left-leaning at one point or another in the not so distant past. Like, it was just a couple of years ago that Joe Rogan was a Bernie Sanders voter. It was just a couple of years ago that Theo Vaughn was platforming Bernie and Democrat ideas. Actually, the week before the president sat down with Theo Vaughn, he did interview Bernie Sanders. And so the media post-election, they were acting like this was a coordinated plot by all of these mainstream celebrities to become Trump supporters towards the end of the election. And that's just not how it happened at all.
Let me ask you, Alex, like, when you first brought this idea to President Trump, who loves traditional media, he goes on Fox News, he goes on NBC, he talks to the New York Times, and you're like, so there's this guy named Theo Vaughn. He's got some crazy hair and he'll talk to you for hours. You should do it. Like, how did you approach this idea with Trump and his team initially?
Well, I can't take full credit for this. I just need to give a lot of credit to Dana White, the founder of UFC. Dana was actually the first person to introduce the president to podcast circuits or podcasting when Dana set up an interview between the president and the Nelk boys in early 2022. The interview crushed it, did about 6 million views in 24 hours, and then YouTube took it down. Fast forward to 2024, Barron Trump actually set up an interview with a guy named Aiden Ross, a 23-year-old kick streamer, video game streamer. And he's very popular, maybe one of the most popular Gen Z influencers and personalities. I
don't think Trump would even know what the term kick streamer is, and Barron set him up.
Now he does. And Barron, to his credit, really smart guy. He was like, this is going to be great for the youth. He was right. I was asked to help make that interview go smoothly. And we did. We crushed it. And then I prepared our reach for the president the next day. That interview in 24 hours between TikTok clips, Instagram Reels, X views, and then the actual live stream itself did 112 million impressions. And I presented that to the president, and he's like, we crushed it. And he posted 112 million views, broke all records. Thank you, Barron. And, so he was jacked up and he was talking about it constantly. Then I was having a conversation with Susie. I was like, we got to do more of these. She's like, we got to do more of these. And she sent me an email that Dana White had sent her previously with a few other podcast personalities that he recommended we sat down with. And the first guy I called was Theo Vaughn. And Theo was like, yes, I want to have the president on.
Was Theo surprised to get that call? Like that wasn't, necessarily an expected guest for his show.
Right. I mean, he was I don't know if surprised. He was interested. He reached out. I think he was excited when we returned his phone call and said, yes, we want to make it happen. And so Susie then tasked me with getting the president on board, and I called the president while he was golfing. And he's like, Alex, how are we doing? And he was still raving about the Aiden Ross numbers. And he said, you and Barron did a great job on that. And I was like, we got to do more. And we got to do this one with Theo Vaughn. He's a really popular comedian right now. He asked me to tell him a little bit about him. And then he gave me the famous line. He's like, okay, that's great. Go get, if Barron likes it, we'll do it.
What made you think that this was an avenue where Trump could successfully engage voters and bring more folks into the MAGA fold? Because like you said, these aren't necessarily podcasters that were like considered even political to begin with, and certainly not, Republican by any means. But like, what is the opportunity and the strategy that you saw there?
Well, first off, we have an incredible pollster, Tony Fabrizio, one of the smartest pollsters.
Oh, everyone in DC knows Tony.
Everybody knows Tony. He and James Blair and La Savita, they were always talking about low propensity voters and identifying where some of these untraditional voters are and where they get their news from. And podcasting is one of the main areas they get their news from. And also it's great entertainment. And the president, obviously, is a great entertainer. And so it was a natural fit. And when the president sat down with some of these stars, there was natural chemistry. And they didn't agree on every issue. It wasn't a softball interview. They were asking about, IVF. They were asking about abortion. They were asking about topics that not every Republican wants to talk about. But they were not aggressive. They were not antagonistic. They asked tough questions, but in a nice manner. The president was able to, he wasn't having to get defensive. He wasn't having to be in a fight mode. And he was able to showcase his real personality. And the general public was able to see the Donald Trump that we get to see on the plane or when we're having dinner with him, on these podcasts. It showed a different side of him that the media has not been able to get.
You've mentioned him several times, the elusive Barron Trump. What is your relationship like with him? Like, what can you tell us about him? Because I think we've all seen him with the president. We all know some basic facts about him, but he's had quite an impact on his father.
Well, he's a brilliant young man. The president has raised incredible children. I don't think the predecessor could say the same, but the president has raised an incredible group of children. And Barron is a special young guy, and he's going to have a really beautiful future, big future. I don't really want to speak too much on our relationship or about him, just because, he's kind of private. He's still very private.
Yeah.
We'll see. One day he might be very public, but you don't know.
But it does seem like Barron has an influence in some specific ways, especially when it comes to reaching voters of his generation, right? I mean, from broadcasting to, I've heard that the crypto world, bringing Trump into that space was largely a Barron, a bit of Barron influence.
The Aiden Ross, let's say the Aiden Ross interview was a massive success for the president. And that would not have been possible had Barron not went to his dad and said, hey, you should go do this interview. And then, it was fun being able to work with him, because we're both younger guys. He's much younger than me, but, we're both, Gen Z.
Yeah, he's starting in politics around the same time you did.
He's got a brilliant future, and I'm excited for him.
Let me ask about what you're doing now, because now you're running sort of the MAGA media operation, but from outside of the White House. How has the strategy changed for this moment?
We have a massive outside social media reach, a media network that we control that can showcase the president's victories every single day. And we are reaching tens of millions of people on social media every single day. On TikTok, last month alone, we did 127 million views compared to the Democrats' 27 million views on TikTok, just on our Team Trump account. And so we have a great tool to highlight the president's wins, highlight the president's message, and our team is doing an incredible job running that. It's really not much different than the type of content that we were posting while we were on the campaign. It's fun, more youthful focused content, and we're just blowing the Democrats out of the water, and they're having to spend, or at least rumored to be spending $20 million looking to kind of replicate our program that we spend just a teeny tiny fraction of a budget on. And so most of our reach is organic.
Let's be honest, though, isn't a lot of your work just kind of trolling the left?
They try to troll themselves, and so when they give us a layup, we'll take it. But
You're trolling right there.
Most of our, by the way, I love David Hogg. David Hogg is fantastic. I'm disappointed that they let him leave the DNC, that they kicked him out of the DNC.
Alex.
And but no, we're much more positive. We won, and so now we have to just showcase how we're going to continue to win for the American people. And so we're very positive, very pro-Trump. We try to spend limited time on the Democrats because they're almost in they're kind of obsolete right now. Their popularity is terrible, and they're boring.
But in your rise to this place where you're sort of taking the victory lap, there was quite a bit of trolling involved. Yeah. There's a reason I called you Trump's chief Twitter troll.
But the trolling, it is fun. It is fun. I'll give you that. But a lot of the trolling was inter-party trolling, and now we have to be nice to everybody because we're unified. We're a very unified party. So, we're not.
That actually brings me to my next question, because the one area where there hasn't been unity is this split in MAGA world over the Israel-Iran conflict. I think this is like the most MAGA on MAGA violence, especially online, that I've seen on any issue. Do you worry about losing some of the base because of the concerns of our involvement overseas?
No, I don't. And the president obviously negotiated an incredible ceasefire deal between Israel and Iran. And, the president isn't going to be swayed by hysterics on the hawkish side or hysterics on the other side. The president is going to do what's best for the American people at all times. Obviously, it was all eyes on him for that few days that he was involved. But he created a great deal. We got a ceasefire. The 12-day war ended. And there's hopefully going to be peace in the region. We'll see what happens. But the president is always going to do what's best for the American people.
But how do you manage, as somebody that does interact with all of these online personalities and puts out messaging, that's helpful to President Trump? How do you manage the base on an issue like this when you do have some big online MAGA influencers like Bannon, like Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk's been kind of, walking a fine line here. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out really upset about some of these actions. How do you navigate this?
Well, I think we just showcase that our party actually allows for free thinking and critical thinking and differing opinions. The Democrats are more in lockstep on everything. They have the talking points that go out and they stick to the script.
So you think it's healthy to have, this debate online that we've been seeing?
I think debate is good when it's coming from honest places, when it's coming from, oh, this is actually my opinion. If it's a paid for effort, and then it's a different situation. Sometimes there's paid and sometimes there's not. We have great people on our team and in our movement that differ on certain strategies. Obviously, the MAGA movement, and myself included, we are hesitant to want to get involved in forever wars. We've seen what has happened. The president has also seen what has happened. He's been very vocal that the Bush era and the neocon era has failed our country, and failed our country, and he still holds that posture. But the president has also always been a believer in peace through strength, which I also believe. And so, but we allow for this debate to happen. We don't shut down the debate. And I think it's actually healthy. Again, if it's coming from an honest place and not like a paid for campaign effort.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that a little bit, because I think that the part of the population that's not chronically online doesn't realize how kind of big of an industry, of a behemoth the paid posts are for influencers, and it's happening across the aisle. But I really started to see it sort of in the MAGA influencer world. It's political folks doing it, candidates and stuff, but it's also businesses that will right? Like pay MAGA influencers to sometimes post things about like a competitor or whatever. Like, can you just give a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on how some of this stuff works? Again,
I'm not
the
familiar
basics.
I'm not familiar with what exact campaigns are being run or whatnot. But if you're going to do business where you can also maintain your street cred and your identity and keep your audience trust. Once you lose the trust of your audience, you really don't get it back. And we saw this with the president's primary opponents, where there was a series of online influencers that were all big MAGA guys, all big Trump lovers. And then all of a sudden they all move over and they become big supporters of the guy who finished in distant third place. And, they were all echoing the same talking points. And then they lost the trust of their audiences and they haven't recovered. And
so that was an example of like a coordinated paid campaign. And the idea, right, Alex, is like to make it kind of look like it's grassroots, but when it's sometimes will start to feel inauthentic, and then people can tell like, oh, that guy's getting paid
right.
to like.
And I think most influencers reject it. Actually, I think most influencers, they care about protecting their image and protecting their their trust with their audience. At least in my experience, they are very careful and they really care about their followers and the content that they put out. And so I think most people reject it. But I'm not naive. I'm sure that there's some people who are doing the paid promotions for certain campaigns.
Yeah.
But protecting your brand identity is important, and protecting your authenticity is important, because if you lose the trust of your audience, it's very difficult to get it back. And same with the politician. It's like you start making some bad votes, your voters are going to start, having less trust in you.
I do want to ask you real quick about the Elon Musk, Donald Trump spat. You're one of the people that's really straddled both worlds, or straddle both worlds. What was that moment like for you? Was it like a Ross and Rachel breakup? You might be too young for the Friends.
No, I got the Friends reference. I got the Friends reference.
But was that hard for you to navigate?
Look, I think it disappointed a lot of people the way Elon behaved. And he has apologized publicly, and the president has said kinder things about him since it all went down. I think a lot of people were disappointed. I think we're also acknowledged the fact that Elon Musk buying X kind of reopened it to being a free speech platform. So I think that there is gratitude still with that, but there's, I think, tremendous disappointment in how that went down. But maybe one day we can all be a big happy family again. But the president is a great man, and I think there were some low blows that were obviously fired off, and I think he regrets posting that.
Do you ever wish you were working inside the White House? Do you still make your way over to Pennsylvania Ave?
I do. I've had I have been able to spend quite a bit of time with the president, since he's been sworn in and since he's been in there. We went golfing with Saquon Barkley a couple of weeks ago up in Bedminster, and then we flew on Air Force One, and I played a game of pickup football on the Rose Garden lawn with Saquon and Ivanka's children, which was an incredible experience. And we've been able to bring in some high profile celebrities to come see the president in the Oval Office. I was in there a couple of weeks ago with Vince Vaughn. And it's really exciting because there's a lot of like mainstream celebrities now who want to be part of who feel comfortable going in to see the president. It's a much different atmosphere than it was during the first term. And it just goes to show how the president's willpower has brought the country along with him. So it's fun to be a part of it. Right now on the outside, maybe on the inside, but I'm having a good time right now.
Well, it certainly is a really different administration, Trump 47 versus 45. And boy, the life of Alex Bruesewitz certainly is a fascinating one. Thank you for sharing a little bit of it with us and joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Dasha.
Thanks so much to Alex Bruesewitz for joining the conversation. Now, I told you guys I was at NATO earlier this week. While I was there, in between meetings, I bumped into my colleague, Felicia Schwartz. She's our diplomatic correspondent, and I got her to sit down with me for a few minutes to talk about this critical moment, this conflict between Israel and Iran, and what it means for diplomatic relations on the ground. Here's my conversation with Felicia. Felicia, thank you for joining me for a very special edition of The Conversation. We've gone global. We are officially global. We're at The Hague, at NATO. Thank you for joining me here.
Such a pleasure. If you're going to go global, I got to be a part of it.
You are our diplomatic correspondent, and you've been covering issues in the Middle East. Specifically, you've even spent some time living in Israel for a long time. This is obviously a critical moment. We've seen so much happen in the last 10, 12 days or so. It's not a new conflict. Israel and Iran have been doing this for a long time. You've witnessed this firsthand. But how is this different?
For a long time, it was a shadow war. It was a lot of, and Israel and Iran, frankly, never really fired at each other directly until last year during the Biden administration. So this is, I guess, the hottest, most direct, most intense version of this conflict, at least in
your time covering this.
I mean, really ever, honestly. I mean, what to do about Iran's nuclear program has been a central question of U.S. foreign policy making, dating back to George W. Bush. And diplomacy has kind of been the name of the game for most of the time. Trump obviously pulled out of the deal. He had tried to strengthen it at one point. Biden attempted to get back in that deal, but struggled as well. Trump tried again to do diplomacy. But, at the end of the day, the Israelis all along have really been wanting to strike, but not without American support and, eventually American participation. So, I mean, for me, this is kind of like the culminating chapter of like a very long journey of looking into this issue, but it's really also only just the beginning. We don't really know how damaged their program is.
Yeah.
It's made like a lot of claims.
I know some of the questions that I'm asking from sort of the White House perspective, but from the diplomatic and national security perspective, like what are the questions that you have that you're pursuing and you're reporting right now?
I mean, we've heard Trump and others in his administration say that, they want Iran to talk, that they want this, they feel like they have Iran on the ropes and they want Iran to negotiate. We need to know, like, how much nuclear material do they have? The U.S. struck the 3 main nuclear sites, but Iran has recently announced that they're building another site. I mean, I think a lot of really good analysts and diplomats would say actually this might make Iran like double down, pursue its program in secret. So I think the big question is like, is Iran willing to talk about any of this? What effect does it have? Its most recent president has been willing to kind of talk to the U.S. They've been taking a posture of negotiation. How will this military campaign affect that situation? Like, on the one hand, I think the Trump team thinks, well, we've put a lot of pressure on them. They have no choice but to like wave the white flag and talk to us. But I think, you could also make the case that there's really no value to them in negotiating with the U.S. I mean, of course, they have these very punishing sanctions, but they've built up a resistance economy. And I think also, like Steve Witkoff, for example, like he was the guy going back and forth with the Iranians. He built up a good rapport with them, sounds like. But can they really take him at his word? Is there anyone in the Trump administration that they can deal with besides Trump? But can, the way these talks work is very technical. It's not something that would happen on the leader level. So it wouldn't really be like I feel like I'm clutching my pearls with all these like diplomatic niceties. They've all basically been thrown out the window. But in this particular case, I don't think it would be like super appropriate or useful to do this at the leader level. Like you need, some empowered political people to kind of make these tough decisions.
Talk about the pearl clutching on the diplomatic front, because I interviewed Richard Grenell recently, who has a very different perspective on diplomacy than a lot of more traditional diplomats. Like, how has diplomacy, the whole idea of it, changed under Trump?
There's a few things. Basically, one is the way that information comes out. Trump is the spokesperson, the strategist. Of course, every president leads their administration and they set the tone, but just the way information flows. I mean, we had a minute-by-minute update of how Trump was feeling about what was going on with the ceasefire. He tweeted exactly around the time that the ceasefire took effect. In other ceasefires and other conflicts I've covered, you get like a statement from both sides saying the ceasefire will go into effect at this time, and here are the terms, and blah, 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 blah. Like, he tweeted something like, the ceasefire is in effect, like 5 minutes after happening, like, thank you for your attention, or, whatever he said. So it's just like,
thank you for your attention to this matter.
I mean,
and how,
for example, to give Trump some credit, in my experience, ceasefires like often fall apart. And this basically if you set a ceasefire to go into effect like 5 hours from now, I mean, we saw this happen overnight. Like, everyone gets in their last like big bombardments, and then when does it end? But Trump basically didn't want much of a window for the ceasefire to start. The idea of just getting the ceasefire started right away, I mean, does make sense to me. But I think there's just a lot of process that's completely evaporated. And I think the challenge here is, sure, leaders make big decisions, but it has to happen on the working level. Like a ceasefire holds because like an Israeli soldier sitting on a base in X doesn't push the button to fire. So there needs to be, or vice versa, or an Iranian
There's a ton of levels at which this is happening. There's minutia, there's granular stuff that
details
that President Trump is dealing with a million different things and multiple conflicts in the world. Typically, you have a lot of people you're delegating this stuff to, but it's just a little bit different.
Totally.
You have such an involved leader at the top.
Totally. But on the flip side, I think when anyone on his team goes into a room to negotiate, his views are pretty clear. There's no mystery about where he is. My kind of theory of the case has always been, I think that Trump has pursued this madman theory of, this chaos theory.
Yeah.
No one knows what he's going to do. I think he did it really well on the Iran strikes. I think, it remains to be seen how much damage has been done to the program. But it's he does it and then he sort of keeps going, I think he's used this tactic super successfully, but then it's it doesn't seem like he has necessarily a strategic end game.
What do you make of the relationship with Israel now at this point? You heard the president this week get pretty upset with Netanyahu and Israel during the whole ceasefire thing. Now, as I think Israel-Hamas, one thing, Israel-Iran, very different thing. And how are you assessing our relationships now?
At the end of Trump's last term, it kind of came out that Trump was really had it with Bibi. Their personal relationship had broken down.
Which I think people forget.
Yeah. In part because Bibi congratulated Biden for winning the election. Pretty standard practice for any leader. Netanyahu's pretty shrewd. He knows he needs to work with whoever. But Trump really didn't like that. I think that I've now covered 4 presidents dealing with Bibi Netanyahu, and all of them come out of the experience very, very annoyed with him. He's super tough to deal with. He's always looking for loopholes. Making a deal with him is almost impossible. This is Bill Clinton's story, if you can believe it, but there's a famous anecdote when Clinton met Bibi when he was first elected to be the prime minister in the 90s. Clinton left the meeting and turned to one of his top aides and said, "Who's the effing superpower here?" This is his style. It is a tough one. It's been tough. I think Trump at various points has gotten pretty fed up with it. I think Trump obviously is, the way he's tweeting about peace or truthing about peace, he is obsessed with his Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's obvious. With the ceasefire again, I think what Trump got really pissed off about was the spirit, right? They were kind of volleying up until the minute the ceasefire was supposed to go into effect. There was one Iranian missile that landed in dead space in Israel that, let's say it started at 7, it happened 7:05, and Bibi, instead of, I think Trump was sort of take the spirit of the deal. Bibi's well, they violated ceasefire. We need to attack, right? We need to restore deterrence. And so I just think in terms of the relationship, I think they're pretty clear-eyed about each other. I think they have political usefulness to each other, even as the MAGA base is fragmenting. I think that this relationship between U.S. and Israel is politically useful for both. So it's not it's ever going to go away. But I think they're very clear-eyed.
From my reporting, Trump wanted Netanyahu to wait. He did not want Israel to strike Iran when they did. But ultimately, Israel pushed, and they, I wouldn't say green-lit it, but yellow lit it.
But then once it happened, right now, this is the U.S. The U.S. is not leading here. Netanyahu drove events. Trump capitalized, as you said, there was a window, but this is really Netanyahu kind of driving what's happening. And I know Trump's trying to frame it he's in control, but it does seem to me that Israel really did have a driving hand here.
Israel had a driving hand. At the same time, America has the power and the ability to flex, and we flexed. And what that means from here is still a big question. Felicia, thank you so much for joining me and for having this conversation in such a cool setting, in such a historic place and a historic moment. We'll see where this all goes.
Thanks so much.
This has been The Conversation with Dasha Burns. If you want to catch future episodes of The Conversation, you can click that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.